Buenos días a todos.
Good morning to everybody.
Muchos me conocen desde
Many of you
años,
know me
más de 20
from a
años,
long
por haber
time,
introducido la
20
técnica de
years,
microoxigenación
because
en
I
España.
introduced the technique of
Una
microoxygenation
verdadera
in
ruptura
Spain.
tecnológica.
That was a
Tal
technological
como
breakthrough at that
hace
time.
ahora 6 años fue la
And 6
bioprotección.
years
Voy a
ago,
hablar de
the
lo que considero,
bioprotection had a similar
la
impact.
bioprotección activa,
I'm going to
distinta de la
talk
bioprotección
of what
pasiva.
I consider
Significa que por la
active
bioprotección
bioprotection as regards, well, per comparison,
por ejemplo, el sulfuroso,
passive
cuando con la
bioprotection,
además,
where we try
aprovechamos
to
los
replace
metabolitos
SO2,
fermentativos.
whether in this case, in the active one, we take advantage of a metabolite. And it was really an important breakthrough when we replaced the sulfur dioxide and we improved the protocols of some wines made in different parts of Europe, from Bulgaria to Portugal, in all the Mediterranean climate area, with some specificities of those vineyards, having water stress, high maturity degree, varieties with specificities regarding phenolic and excessive phenolic load, especially in white wines, excessive load because it is going to encourage Brettanomyces because they like to consume lactic acids. Also more aromatic wine consumption in our areas with less aggressive wines. And in some transparencies, I'm going to try to present how bioprotection has allowed me to deblock, at least in this case, 5 problems that I found along my counseling activities. The first problem was aggressivity of the red wines. Sometimes there is an excessive extraction of tannins and an increase in the uptake of fat. So we can, by removing this SO2, we can increase the extraction, or decrease the extraction of tannin and increase the uptake of these GRAs, or fats. And then also there is a lack of freshness, and there is also a lack of acidity. And this is a problem that we solve by producing the wines without the addition of sulfite and producing more acidity in the fermentation. And I collaborate with Cellar with the demand of having wines with an aroma expression, using in this case several procedures, including bioprotection of yeasts, of Saccharomyces, and going through back to Bacillus plantarum up to Enococcus bacteria. The Brettanomyces, while bioprotection has been a way to eliminate sulfur dioxide in the first parts, when we kill all microorganisms, the problem is that we will have only the most resistant one, which is Brettanomyces. And we will see how we were able to accelerate these different populations and limit the population of Brettanomyces. And in the south of France, there was bioprotection that was a kind of reinvent carbonic maceration. Aggressivity of red wines. This is the first case. In this case, we wanted to remove the sulfur dioxide in hot areas so as to have more selective extraction of tannins. And we have also removed the excessive solvent character or nature of this of the juice. And in this case, we replace sulfur dioxide by a microorganism that is going to occupy the ambient more quickly, and produce metabolites. On the one hand, we have Turulaspora delbrecki that is going to produce polysaccharides that, on the longer run, are going to allow a more perception of fats in a wine that has not many tannins, because we didn't use sulfur dioxide. That was one of the first uses of Turulaspora in red wine, especially in competition with Brettanomyces and Particulata, and also working with without sulfur dioxide to have a better capture of fats. The lack of freshness, this is the second problem. We can use different masks due to an excessive phenolic mark in hot areas wines, where we have used excessive time to inhibit the evolution, the too fast evolution of the whites, was to add sulfite to the must to block polyphenase. And we know, according to the studies, that a contribution of oxygen to the must favors an approach that, in the end, on a longer run, is going to eliminate the oxidation engine of the must. Instead of adding sulfur dioxide to inhibit this activity from 20-30 grams of total sulfur, we are going to let the must to oxidize in a controlled way, more or less controlled way, so that we can get cleaning, a natural cleaning, thanks to the must activity. We will have to clarify to eliminate the oxidated compounds, but in this phase we can moderate the oxidation using non-Saccharomyces organisms that can consume oxygen. This is the case of Pichac Le Berry that we are going to see with its capacity to consume oxygen. In this phase, without sulfur dioxide in white or rosé wines, we can use microorganisms that add freshness to the succinate acid through or thanks to Lactanza thermotolerance, which is a yeast that is going to produce from the pressing stage a significant amount of acid, lactic acid and succinic acid, and is going to transform into acetates, lactate acetate, with an aromatic, fresh character or nature. We can also, another application of bioprotection, from the moment we don't have sulfur dioxide, total sulfur dioxide in the white or rosé wines, we can use bacteria at the end of the alcoholic fermentation, which is diacetyl, that does not make or create a mask. This bacteria is going to allow, in a white wine or a rosé wine, is going to allow us to come to this stability without producing diacetyl. And therefore we can combine freshness, thanks to this acidity produced by Concerto, by Lactanza thermotolerance, and in white wines and rosé wines, this is going to respect the aromatic profile, stabilizing the wine without producing anything else. The case of an experience I carried out in Provence, in my area, was to make rosé wines without adding sulfur dioxide through a bioprotection from the in the pressing, inoculating with pique, with Saccharomyces, that is going to, yeast that is going to moderately consume oxygen without sulfur dioxide. There is a certain activity of this yeast that does not fermentate, and therefore by rubbing or by cold processes we can tackle the metabolism of this yeast. If we compare it with the other two Saccharomyces microorganisms, we can see that the color of the wine at the end of this experiment with pica is more yellowish, and by chromometry we can confirm that this yeast is going to inhibit the production of oxidated pigments by oxidative microorganisms. Here in the pica modality, we can see that what is still in the must when fermenting is 98% of Saccharomyces cerevisiae. And the same microorganisms used for bioprotection, we have left these microorganisms to multiply because they can have an oxidative activity along fermentation and producing roses that are more yellowish in color. Third point, which is the heart of bioprotection, was when in 2011 or 12, when my client asked me to make these very high volumes of non-sulfurous wine. How to make these volumes on an industrial level, preserving the freshness of these wines, well known in these wines, without effects. Because both in rosé, white wines, and in red, there is the mousy flavor that is very distracting when consuming wine, and also successful performance in the making, in 100% of the making. So we're going to study what we harnessed. There is a competition with inhibition through competition for nutrients uptake or through better adaptation to the medium conditions. This is going to battle to fight against the other microorganisms in the three types of wines, in white, in rosé, and in red wines. And there are different concentrations of all the bacteria, the tolerance, the pica, etc. The second pillar of this logic is to tackle the production of metabolites, and this is the own character or nature of active bioprotection, to produce either polysaccharides or acids. In white and rosé, or even in red wines, we can acidify, lowering the pH in a significant way until even excessive levels. And we can even use, by using Hansen's thermotolerance, that can lower the pH from 0.1 to 0.2 in Masuelo wine, ecological wine with this pH. This can be excessive. We have to always remember that this is not, well, this is a very significant acidification process. And we can also use fructsen. Fructsen, as I mentioned it before, fructsen allows in these types of wines without addition of sulfur dioxide, this allows some acidification to lower the pH slightly, but to moderate the oxidation and the pre-fermentative stage when we want to make thiolic type wine without addition of sulfur dioxide. This is a yeast that is going to moderate the oxidation of the mast, which is going to also allow us to enhance the aromatic expression, as we have seen in the previous presentations, through the activity, or thanks to the activity of beta lyase. And these non-Saccharomyces organisms, especially Torula spora and pica, have this capability of producing esterols and thiols. And this means that we can imagine to make white wine expressing with a lot of expression without sulfur dioxide, thanks to the bioprotection of mast with yeast, protecting yeast. and with the total absence of production of caramel due to diacetyl. It is important to perform malolactic fermentation in a quick way, because what happens in that phase is the development of oxidative microorganisms that oxidate the pH. And we are going to see that the idea to perform malolactic fermentation in a fast way is to avoid the production of tetrahydropyridine. Pyridine is the molecule responsible for the mousy flavor that I mentioned before. The problem with this yeast is that in the case of redox, a high redox reaction, it will lower the threshold of the oxidated form of this molecule to the reduced form of the molecule, and it's going to multiply by 100-fold, and therefore it is important to tackle malolactic fermentation as a substitute of the sulfur at the end of the fermentation. Not doing malolactic fermentation in such a wine without sulfur dioxide addition risks the appearance of this oxidative flavor, the mousy off flavor. In most of the cases, the red wines that we make without addition of sulfur dioxide, this is the big challenge in the future, to offer the consumer an aromatic red wine that is stable, but also on a longer term. Due to its phenolic load, red wine can lower their redox processes, but not instantaneously, not in a quick way, but it presents for a lot of time a mousy off flavor nature, this kind of butter, rancid butter flavor that is very displeasing. And the best way to reduce the wine is to perform malolactic in a very quick way, fast way, and with bacteria selected by its suitability with the wine, pH, alcohol, and also the notion of fastness, quickness, because the longer the wine is between alcoholic and malolactic fermentation, the higher the mousy and the pyridine character or nature in the wine. Betalomyces brasiliensis. In all the south of France, we have problems due to the load in phenolic acids that appear in our varieties. The level of maturity is going to be high, and some ruptures in the succession of different fermentations, especially in the alcoholic malolactic phase or stage. We are going to use the absence of sulfur dioxide in the barreling phase to inhibit the development of Brettanomyces, and we consider that among the various microorganisms, these tolerants and botrytis are the organisms that inhibit this development. It is important later to have a quick succession, a very dynamic succession of populations. With microoxygenation, for many years we have proposed to respect a necessary time to the production of acetaldehyde, acetaldehyde, for the bonds between anthocyanins and tannins, more stable pigments are created. This is not, it is a question of occupying the wine in this stage in a suitable way so as not to leave the door open excessively, but selecting a microorganism that by essence of sulfur dioxide, absence of sulfur dioxide, is going to implant itself in a very quick way. And to finish with carbonic maceration, which is a technique that in my area has been used for a long time when harvesting manually. And obviously, it was a very adequate technique for sellers that were not well equipped, that were having rather autochthonous varieties like Mazuelo, very rustic varieties, that proposed an aromatic nature with a lot of risks for deviations. For example, acetate, Brettanomyces. And due to all this, apart from the machine harvesting, this technique has been abandoned, especially due to an excessive extraction of the marc that did not give a good harmonious nature. And this reinvention has, or this technique has enabled us to reinvert carbonic maceration. However, we are concerned about the formation of sticking through the development of apiculata, sorry. And this is going to increase the content in acetate up to masking the fermenting character of the maceration that we are looking for. We can try to inhibit the development of Cloaca apiculata by using bacteria such as Lactobacillus plantarum from the moment of the barreling stage. This means to suppress sulfur dioxide. Tradition in France with carbonic maceration was to acidify their harvesting and putting a lot of strongly sulfur dioxide of the harvest to avoid the production of the development of Cloaca apiculata, sorry, as well as to limit the development of lactic bacteria with the risk of picking. And in this case, thanks to the development of Lactobacillus plantarum, we are going to occupy the whole environment so that when the must is accumulated at the bottom of the deposit of the tank, we will see a development of a lactic bacteria that, apart from controlling the rest of microorganisms, is going to consume malic acid accumulated. And when debarreling, we don't have the risk of having a problem with the wine through lactic pitting. And this allows us to have better wines with the green character due to not with an excessive green color due to an excessive extraction of the harvest. In this case, we can add a complementary phase, which is the acidification through the Lancian's thermotolerance. And we can harvest with Lactobacillus plantarum, and 2 days after we can add Lactobacillus thermotolerans, L thermotolerans, to acidify and limit the excessive concentration of potassium due to the Reikis. And now we can, this is a system or a methodology that can make us refocus our production without this excessive extraction of the tannic green nature of the rakis. I didn't have time to comment on something. It's talking about freshness.
Es el tema de también replantear los rosados.
Well, it's to talk about rosés, which are in fashion in the Provence, which is one of my areas, and then in Languedoc, with search for the thiol character or nature, even in an excessive way. by many consumers, and which in the end ends up by tiring the consumers. It is not about recipes, it is about changing models, combining methodologies, as we were doing with the carbonic fermentation. We have to check on the malolactic fermentation in the must to harness the volume of malolactic fermentation, and after that to proceed to a production of lactic acid through the L thermotolerance. All that before alcoholic fermentation, and therefore we combine fat and stabilization through Lactobacillus plantarum for 2 days, and then acidification due to the development of L thermotolerance. And therefore we will have rosé with a higher volume in our mouth, a fresher one, and a way to differentiate, and this is very attractive commercially speaking, a way to differentiate ourselves in the market, because all the rosés are now expressed either by the thiolic nature or the fermentative nature or character. I wanted to present what we have to reinvent the processes and the profiles, harnessing or taking advantage of both microorganisms that are existing, without speaking about the microorganisms that we are going to hear about tomorrow, and focusing on active bioprotection, harnessing the metabolites in this pre-fermentative phase. Thank you very much for your attention.